I mean, it's perfectly fine for Christians to be elected to office, but once you are in office as a Christian, if the only rationale that you can give for whatever legislation you're pushing is one that is rooted in your religiosity, then it's not legitimate, because that is a violation of other people's. Now, if you've got a good, like, for instance, the idea about not murdering, a person might push back on what I'm saying and say, well, wait a minute, should we not have laws against murder just because that's in the 10 Commandments? No, of course not, because there are perfectly secular reasons to not allow murder, right? There are perfectly secular reasons to not allow theft, to not allow some of the other stuff that is prohibited in the 10 Commandments. Some of that stuff you don't need religion to know not to do, right? But the other stuff that is purely religious has nothing to do with that. And if the argument you have, for instance, against abortion ultimately has to do with the radical innocence of the unborn, and you get that idea from scripture, and you get that idea of when personhood begins from some scripture that you can quote, I knew you and formed you in the womb, said God, or whatever the phraseology is, right? If that's your argument, that's fine for you. If that's why you want to believe life begins at the point of conception, that's fine. You have every right to that belief. But if you're going to seek to impose a law based on a belief that is fundamentally rooted in religiosity, not in science, not in some deep philosophical understanding of personhood, which is a very complicated notion. It isn't as simple as, human life. Human life is a scientific thing. And I don't know anyone that denies that embryonic life is human or fetal human life is human life. The question is it personhood? Personhood is a concept that has been discussed and debated by philosophers, discussed and debated by theologians. If your only argument is theological, then you were governing from a place that I do not think in a secular society is valid. If you can come up with a solid philosophical argument that's free from that, then okay, then we can talk. Right. Otherwise, you are trying to impose theocratic principles on the rest of us, even if we don't share those ideas.
And of course, the point gets made all day, every day. And if you are going to believe that, then keep believing that once the baby's born about its life.
Right. Of course. Which they don't, because they don't want to expand the healthcare programs that young children need. They don't want to provide the opportunities for young people, whether it's mental health care, physical health care, emotional health care, education itself. They don't want to do any of that. These are people who fetishize the embryonic life. They fetishize fetal life for reasons that are principally religious. And again, for them, that's fine. But when you try to make secular law on that basis, it's not fine. The same is true if you decide you're going to go after drag shows because God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Eve who thinks Eve Steve. Like, that is not an argument, right? If that's your argument, God made us this way, we're just men and women. That's not, like, you can believe that. You can preach that at your church. You can teach the children that in your youth group at church, at whatever. But like when you're trying to make laws based on what you think God said, maybe it's just me, but I don't think God needs the Speaker of the Tennessee House to be his little messenger boy. I don't think God actually needs people the likes of, Ted Cruz to be his little messenger boy or whoever. I don't think that God needed Pat Robertson to bring the good news to the people. Like, if God really wants us to know that drag is bad, God could sort of let us know without having to go through these third-rate intermediaries that apparently have anointed themselves, right? And so what you have is people whose principal arguments for these things are rooted in their sectarian theological principles. And although those are fine for their home, the idea that they have a right to govern on that basis for the rest of us is simply against everything that this country has or should stand for, and certainly what we claim to stand for. We are supposed to be a pluralistic nation, and we should govern as one.